Welcome to our deep dive into one of television's most iconic and beloved shows, MASH. In this video, we'll explore the fascinating backstory behind the series that began as a best-selling novel, evolved into a critically acclaimed film, and then rose to new heights of popularity as a long-running TV phenomenon. We'll also uncover why McLean Stevenson, one of the most memorable cast members, decided to leave MASH at the peak of its success. From intriguing production secrets to the record-breaking finale, this look at the hit show will give you new insights into how MASH captured hearts around the world and why Stevenson's departure remains such a hotly debated topic to this day. In 1970, director Robert Altman released a movie called MASH, which was based on the 1968 novel MASH, a novel about three Army doctors, written by Richard Hooker. The film was one of the most popular releases in the early 70s. It was nominated for 5 Academy Awards, of which it won Best Adapted Screenplay. Audiences were so taken by this black comedy that it led to a TV series of the same name, which was released in 1972. Those facts alone illustrate that MASH's success was a perfect storm of creative energy, social context, and a touch of controversy. The film, with its irreverent take on the Korean War, arrived at a time when the United States was still deeply embroiled in the Vietnam War. Audiences, fatigued by the endless stream of tragic news reports, were ready for a different angle on war, one that walked the line between humor and harsh reality. Robert Altman's directorial style, often characterized by overlapping dialogue, loose improvisational energy, and a focus on ensemble casts, fit perfectly with the tone of Hooker's novel. Altman's approach allowed for a sense of realism that underscored the absurdity of war, making MASH both a dark satire and a pointed commentary on military bureaucracy. The decision to adapt the film into a television series was initially met with skepticism. At that time, war-based TV shows that tried to integrate humor into such a serious subject were not particularly common. Critics and network executives alike questioned whether an ongoing series could replicate or sustain the unique balance of comedy and tragedy that the film had. However, the strong appeal of the original movie, and especially the novel that inspired it, convinced producers and television executives that there was more than enough material to develop a weekly half-hour show. This transition from film to TV meant that the creative team had to consider a variety of constraints: budgetary limitations, censorship rules, and the necessity of building stories and characters that could endure for multiple seasons. What often gets overlooked is how the success of the film paved the way for a more nuanced exploration of war on television, especially during a period of social and political upheaval in the United States. The late 1960s and early 1970s were rife with protests against the Vietnam War, and audiences were primed for entertainment that could offer commentary, whether direct or symbolic, on the futility and heartbreak associated with armed conflict. MASH, the film, captured this moment perfectly. It was irreverent but honest, comedic yet brutally frank, which resonated strongly with a nation grappling with whether military interventions were justified. Moreover, the film's ensemble cast, which included Donald Sutherland as Hawkeye Pierce, Elliot Gould as Trapper John, Tom Skerritt as Duke Forrest, and Sally Kellerman as Hot Lips Houlihan, helped create characters who felt both highly individualistic and universally relatable. Their irreverent banter and subversion of authority reflected the anti-establishment ethos of the era. It's important to remember that the novel's themes, originally drawn from Richard Hooker's own experiences, served as the bedrock for both the film and the later series. The humor wasn't merely slapstick, it served as a coping mechanism for frontline medical personnel grappling with the trauma of war. One aspect not often discussed is the difference in tone between the film and the eventual TV series. Robert Altman's movie was more anarchic, relying on some extreme comedic situations and a kind of floating narrative that wasn't entirely linear. It had a rawness that captured critical acclaim, but also ruffled feathers among more traditional viewers who expected a standard war film. The TV adaptation had to be more structured, following a clear episodic format, introducing arcs that continued from episode to episode, and employing jokes and comedic elements that fit the half-hour time slot. The show, therefore, can be seen as a careful balancing act. It retained the irreverent soul of the film, but also softened some of its more radical edges to appease network standards and attract a broader audience. Additionally, the thematic undercurrent that tied both the film and the series together was the sense of camaraderie under constant pressure. Both mediums portrayed medical personnel who had to maintain their sanity and compassion while surrounded by death and chaos. Robert Altman's film captured that spirit with its liberal use of improvisation and overlapping dialogue, reflecting the frantic nature of a mobile army surgical hospital. When transitioning to a weekly show, the producers recognized that this sense of camaraderie had to remain front and center. They couldn't rely solely on jokes or comedic sketches. They needed to develop the characters' relationships to show them supporting each other under duress. This is perhaps one of the strongest legacies of the film, proving that war stories could be about genuine human connection rather than just strategy and valor on the battlefield. The film's success also proved that audiences were open to a nuanced take on conflict. This understanding gave the television writers and producers more confidence to tackle heavier subjects like mortality, battlefield injuries, and moral dilemmas in subsequent episodes. While the film itself operates within a 2-hour window, the show had the luxury of exploring deeper emotional arcs over multiple seasons. That said, the spirit of the original novel and Altman's directorial approach to the film always hovered in the background, guiding the showrunners on how far they could push comedic irreverence without losing the sense of underlying tragedy. It's also worth noting that the film's comedic style, sometimes called black comedy or dark comedy, wasn't necessarily common in mainstream cinema at the time. The success of MASH paved the way for more daring narratives that combined humor and tragedy in unconventional ways. This cross-pollination of comedic and dramatic elements would become a hallmark of the television series. By proving that viewers could handle and even crave such complexity, the film essentially gave birth to the show's creative mandate to make people laugh at the absurdities of war while never forgetting the high stakes and dreadful realities lurking behind the jokes. Network executives used the film's box office and award recognition as a barometer for potential television success, and fans of the movie were willing to give a weekly series a try, even if it meant adjusting to new actors in some of the iconic roles. That willingness to adapt to a new cast and format speaks to how deeply MASH had resonated with the public, even before it became the groundbreaking TV show we know today. MASH ran for over 10 years until it finally ended in 1983, with a total of 11 seasons and 256 episodes. Over the course of the series, MASH was nominated for a staggering amount of Emmy Awards, over 100. It won 14 of those nominations, including Outstanding Comedy Series and Best Lead Actor in a Comedy Series. MASH ran on CBS, and during its first season, it struggled to keep good ratings due to its time slot. However, After the time slot was moved for the second season, the ratings increased greatly. Today, MASH is recognized as one of the highest-rated TV shows in American history. The television show followed the staff of the 4077th Mobile Army Surgical Hospital. Stationed in South Korea during the Korean War, it also served as an allegory for the Vietnam War, which was still raging overseas during the time the show aired. While the show was primarily a comedy, its dark humor also reminded audiences of the horrors of war. The writers of the show carefully walked the line between serious and hilarious to keep this balance. MASH became the first TV show ever to use more than one plot line. A typical MASH episode featured two plots, one of which was dramatic while the other was comedic. MASH was an incredibly influential show and paved the way for other incredible TV series to come. The art of balancing comedy and dark themes was arguably the show's defining hallmark. This careful mix of levity and gravity was a relatively novel concept for primetime television in the early 1970s. Before MASH, most situation comedies followed a predictable formula. They introduced a quirky problem at the start, navigated a series of comedic misunderstandings, and neatly resolved everything before the closing credits. Rarely did a comedy delve into serious commentary about life and death issues. MASH, by contrast, was set against the backdrop of war, a scenario rife with moral dilemmas and profound sorrow. What made the show so compelling was its honest portrayal of how medical personnel might maintain sanity in such dire circumstances. The comedic elements often arose from coping mechanisms, sarcasm, practical jokes, and playful banter that the characters used to distract themselves from the grim realities of battlefield injuries. For instance, Hawkeye Pierce was known for his relentless wisecracks, but behind his humor lay a compassionate doctor who used humor to shield himself from the emotional toll of treating severely wounded soldiers. This dynamic became a recurring pattern. An episode might start with Hawkeye cracking jokes in the operating room, only for the mood to shift when a particularly dire case appeared. It's worth noting that the show's portrayal of medical procedures and the wounded was, for the era, quite graphic in certain episodes, even if it doesn't compare to the surgical realism we see in modern medical dramas. MASH integrated actual medical jargon and relatively accurate, for the time, depictions of combat casualties. This added weight to the comedic aspect. The humor never felt frivolous because it was usually anchored by the reality that these characters were dealing with life and death. This duality kept audiences invested because it mirrored real human emotion under stress. The decision to run two plot lines in one episode, one dramatic, one comedic, allowed MASH to maintain that delicate tonal balance. This innovative storytelling structure provided a blueprint for many future TV series that sought to mix humor and drama. Rather than confine each episode to a single comedic scenario, the writers might depict a comedic storyline featuring, say, Klinger's attempts to be discharged on the grounds of insanity, while simultaneously tracking a more somber storyline about a critically injured soldier. In doing so, the show crafted a narrative tapestry that felt closer to real life, where comedy and tragedy often coexist. By serving as an allegory for the Vietnam War, MASH was able to explore deeper social and political questions without overtly referencing the then-current conflict. This approach, which relied on parallels rather than direct commentary, allowed the show to address controversial issues in a way that network censors and a broad segment of viewers would find acceptable. It touched on topics like the futility of war, the bureaucracy that impedes medical assistance, and the psychological toll on young men who are drafted and sent to the front lines. The comedic veneer made these subjects more palatable, but the show never hid from the reality of war's consequences. This balancing act became even more intricate as the series progressed. In the early seasons, the comedic elements were more pronounced, and the show leaned heavily on the absurdities of military life. As time went on, and especially as the main cast grew more comfortable and the writers gained confidence, episodes started to adopt a more introspective tone. The humor was still there, but the darker undercurrents became more explicit. Characters dealt with loss, post-traumatic stress, and ethical quandaries. The fact that audiences stuck with the show through these tonal shifts highlights how compelling the concept of dramedy had become. One key advantage of blending comedy with darker themes is that it allowed MASH to maintain a broad appeal. Viewers who tuned in primarily for a lighthearted escape found plenty of jokes and comedic set pieces. Meanwhile, those seeking something deeper were rewarded with social commentary and authentic emotional storylines. This multifaceted approach was unusual at a time when shows were often pigeonholed into specific genres. Sitcoms were comedic, dramas were serious, and rarely did the two overlap. MASH's success in defying that norm paved the way for later shows that adopted similar strategies, like Scrubs, Orange is the New Black, and even certain episodes of Buffy the Vampire Slayer. It also had a subtle impact on viewers' perceptions of war itself. For some, MASH was their first exposure to the complexities of what goes on behind the front lines. They might have come expecting laughs, but over time they gained a nuanced understanding of the kind of ethical dilemmas medical personnel face in a war zone. The humor in MASH wasn't purely for entertainment. It served as a gateway to empathy and reflection. That, more than anything, may be the show's lasting contribution to how war stories are told on television. Only one of the original film actors was cast in the series. The original MASH film, released in 1970, featured an immensely talented cast, including Donald Sutherland, Michael Murphy, and Tom Skerritt. When the film was adapted into a show, however, producers had to find an entirely new cast. While the original actors enjoyed working on the film, most of them had other projects already in the works, and they weren't ready to sign a contract that required them to film a TV show for several years. Instead, the show's creators cast Alan Alda as Hawkeye Pierce, Wayne Rogers as Trapper John, and Loretta Swit as Hot Lips Houlihan. The only character whose actor didn't change was Radar O'Reilly, who was played by Gary Berghoff in both the film and the series. McLean Stevenson's character, Lieutenant Colonel Henry Blake, was arguably the most popular character on MASH during the first 3 seasons. His acting skills set him apart from the rest of the cast, and he even earned a Golden Globe Award in 1974. However, he grew frustrated as his scenes were frequently cut from the show. Most MASH episodes focused on other characters, namely Hawkeye and Trapper John. Stevenson began itching for the limelight. His dreams came true when NBC offered him his very own show after Johnny Carson retired from his position. Believing it was a risk worth taking, Stevenson left MASH after the 3rd season, and the writers killed his character off in a plane crash. This meant that, even if his career didn't go well, he wouldn't be able to return to the series as a backup. Unfortunately, Stevenson's gamble didn't exactly pan out. He was given a few shows of his own, but they were ultimately failures, and his unsuccessful career became so apparent that comedians even used his misfortune as a running joke. If Stevenson had stayed on MASH, it would have guaranteed a far longer and more prosperous career. Unfortunately, the risk he took ended up costing him his fame. The producers of the show were dismayed to learn that CBS wouldn't allow them to cut the laugh track from their show. They argued a laugh track wouldn't fit the tone, especially since it was rather dark at times. CBS was insistent, however, explaining that every other comedy show used a laugh track at that time. Changing the status quo was risky, especially during the 70s. As a result, the laugh track stayed. Producers were at least granted the ability to remove the laugh track from the operating room, which added a more serious layer to those scenes. As the show cemented itself in American households, however, CBS finally relented and allowed the laugh track to be removed in DVD episodes. People can now choose whether or not they want to include the laugh track while rewatching their favorite episodes. The name of Radar's teddy bear revealed Radar O'Reilly's teddy bear was the most iconic and symbolic prop on the show. The fact that O'Reilly still slept with a teddy bear was frequently used as a joke, but it also brought a wholesome and bittersweet element to the show. It represented the way war stripped away people's childhood innocence. While the teddy bear was never given an actual name on the show, the actor behind Radar, Gary Berghoff, once revealed he secretly named it Tiger. After the show ended, the prop mysteriously disappeared for a time. 22 years later, however, someone discovered the bear at an auction. A medical student bought the bear for $11,500, but instead of keeping it, he gave the memento to Gary Berghoff himself. This just goes to show how deeply MASH affected its longtime fans. Make sure you stick around until the end because we're also going to reveal how this incredibly popular show broke records with its iconic series finale. And if you're enjoying this video so far, please take a moment to like it and subscribe to our channel for more. Some of the actors actually served in the Korean War. The fact that some of the actors in MASH actually served in the Korean War brought an element of realism to the show. Lead actor Alan Alda, who played Hawkeye, served in Korea as a junior officer. He also served in the Army Reserve for half a year. This experience is probably a contributing factor behind Alda's convincing performance as Hawkeye. He wasn't the only one in MASH to serve in the war. Jamie Farr, the actor who played Maxwell Cleaner, was also a veteran of the Korean War. Furthermore, while neither Wayne Rogers nor Mike Farrell served in the Korean War, they were both war veterans by the time they were cast in MASH. These veterans were all able to contribute their knowledge and experience to the show, and they no doubt helped their fellow actors more accurately portray life in the military. Some historical facts were left out. While MASH was based on the real-life events of the Korean War, the writers of the show had to be careful about what they included. The show is known for bringing up very serious topics, which were often considered taboo at the time. However, certain themes were not allowed to be discussed. The writers had to keep MASH patriotic at all times, meaning they couldn't discuss the more ugly side of the Korean War. America is a country with a long and complicated history. While we'd like to think of ourselves as the good guys, the truth is, America's made its fair share of horrible mistakes. Furthermore, the Korean War was filled with horrors and atrocities. A large number of the soldiers drafted would intentionally make themselves sick in hopes of being sent home. However, the writers were not allowed to show this more complicated side of American history and had to leave out some of the more controversial topics. The final episode of MASH was titled Goodbye, Farewell, and Amen, broke a record. This bittersweet finale broke the record for the highest percentage of audience members with television sets to tune into the show. The episode ran for 2.5 hours, and a total of 125 million viewers sat down to watch it. One urban legend claims so many people sat straight through the episode without using the bathroom that, after the show ended, plumbing systems broke down from so many people using the bathroom at the same time. MASH was both extremely popular and incredibly influential, and people today still love watching reruns. That's all for our behind-the-scenes look at MASH and the real reason why McLean Stevenson left the show prematurely. Despite the challenges and controversies surrounding his departure, the series continued to make television history and still does, with countless fans watching reruns decades later. Now we want to hear from you. Which revelation surprised you the most? Was it the truth behind McLean Stevenson's exit, or another lesser-known tidbit about the show's production? Let us know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, remember to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more in-depth looks at your favorite TV classics. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.